"Ma'am, step back." That's all she heard before the sting hit her face. A crack, sharp, echoing through the courtroom like a gunshot. The room froze. A black woman, handcuffed, trembling, stared at the white cop who had just slapped her across the cheek. Her name? Danielle Brooks, 34, black, Harvard-educated lawyer. And in that moment, treated like she was nothing. The crowd gasped. Some whispered. Others recorded. But no one, not even the bailiff, stepped forward. Danielle's lip bled. Her voice, low but steady, cut through the silence. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," the officer smirked. "Big talk for someone in cuffs," she didn't respond. She just stared, not with fear, but with the fire of someone who's had enough. Beat. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're from in the comments, hit like and subscribe. Because what you're about to hear is a story America needs to face. They said she was disruptive. That's why they arrested her. But no one mentioned what really happened, that she'd just exposed the mayor's son for corruption. That she'd spoken truth to power, and power didn't like that. Hours earlier, she was standing tall in that same courtroom, defending a young black man falsely accused of theft. Her voice was firm, her facts airtight, until a white prosecutor sneered, "You people sure know how to make drama out of nothing." Danielle didn't flinch. "You people? You mean Americans? Because that's what my client is." The courtroom went silent. The judge frowned. The prosecutor gritted his teeth. And from that moment, she was marked. After the hearing, 2 officers followed her out. They said she fit a description, dragged her back inside. And when she asked why, that's when the slap came. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just looked him dead in the eye and whispered something no one caught, not even the cameras. But weeks later, that same courtroom would see her again. Only this time, she wouldn't be standing in front of the judge. She was the judge. How did a woman slapped in handcuffs end up sitting in the judge's chair? Before the slap, before the humiliation, Danielle Brooks was that woman everyone whispered about, the one who made it. Born in Atlanta, Georgia, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs. Her mom used to say, "Baby, they'll judge you twice. First for your skin, then for your strength. So make sure both shine." Danielle did exactly that. Valedictorian, full ride to Harvard. By 34, she was one of the youngest public defenders in the state. She fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves, mostly poor black men and women caught in a system that saw them as case numbers. Not humans, but every win came with a cost. Whispers in the hall, "You're too emotional. You only defend people like you. You don't fit the firm's image." Still, she kept her head high. Because she wasn't just chasing justice, she was justice in heels and natural curls. Then came the Henderson case. A 19-year-old black college student accused of stealing a white classmate's laptop. No evidence, no witnesses, just a hunch. Danielle shredded the prosecution's argument piece by piece, until the prosecutor, Mr. Callahan, snapped. "You people always play the victim," he said, voice dripping with contempt. Danielle froze. The courtroom did too. Her client looked at her, scared, small. She took a deep breath. "Your racism is showing, counselor," she said softly. "You might want to tuck that back in before the jury sees it." The judge slammed the gavel. "Order!" But it was too late. The moment went viral, clipped, posted, and shared. Some called her a hero, others a race baiter. And the next morning, her office received a security notice. Threats, slurs, anonymous letters. And then, something worse. An internal investigation. They said she was unprofessional, disrespectful to colleagues, even questioned her mental stability. Danielle laughed when she read the report, until she realized it wasn't a joke. They were coming for her license, beat. "If you're watching this," Danielle would later say in an interview, "remember, when you challenge power, power hits back, hard." The slap in the courtroom wasn't random. It was a warning, a message from the system she dared to fight. But what they didn't know was that Danielle Brooks had been preparing her whole life to turn pain into power, and when fate gave her that one chance, she didn't just fight back. She rose above them all, The air in the courtroom was thick with silence. Everyone stared, the jurors, the clerk, even the judge. No one dared move. Danielle's cheek burned. A small line of blood trailed down to her chin. She didn't wipe it. She wanted them to see what had just happened. The officer, a broad man with a badge that read C. Doyle, stepped back slightly. He looked nervous now. The weight of what he'd done was settling in, but the judge, Judge Patterson, slammed his gavel. "Enough, Officer Doyle! Remove her from the courtroom!" Danielle's voice broke through like thunder. "No, you'll hear me out." The room shifted. A murmur rippled through the benches. Every eye turned to the woman in cuffs. "This is exactly why people like me don't trust your system," she said. "Because when a black woman speaks truth, you silence her." Judge Patterson looked uncomfortable. "This isn't the time for speeches." "Oh, but it is," Danielle shot back. "Because the moment you let an officer strike a lawyer in your courtroom and say nothing, you've made your verdict clear. Justice doesn't live here, Beat. If you're watching this right now, tell me, what would you have done if that slap was meant to break you? Comment below, hit like, and subscribe." They dragged her out anyway. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting. She was booked, fingerprinted, charged with disorderly conduct. Her mugshot, a tired, bruised face, was everywhere by morning. That disrespectful defender trended on social media. Half the world called her dangerous. The other half called her a hero. But in the middle of that storm, one call changed everything. It was from Judge Eleanor Jackson, the state's first black female judge and Danielle's mentor from law school. "Baby," Eleanor said softly, "you're walking through fire. But don't you forget, fire purifies gold," Danielle cried for the first time that night. Not because she was scared, but because she was tired. Tired of fighting for justice in a system designed to crush her spirit. Still, the next morning, she got up, put on a clean suit, and walked into her disciplinary hearing. 3 men stared down at her from behind a polished oak table. One of them smirked. "Miss Brooks, this board is reviewing whether your actions reflect the integrity of the bar." She smiled faintly. "I hope it does, because integrity is all I had left when your officer hit me." They didn't like that answer. They suspended her license, and just like that, everything she'd built was gone. But what they didn't know was that Danielle wasn't done. She was just getting started. What will Danielle do now that she's lost her license and reputation? The morning after her suspension, Danielle woke up to the sound of her phone vibrating nonstop. Her inbox was flooded. Hate mail, threats, even memes mocking her. One message read, "You got what you deserved, you loudmouthed black bitch." She stared at it for a long time, then quietly closed the app. Her world had collapsed overnight. Her law office locked. Her name tarnished. Her license gone, but her voice still hers. She opened her laptop and started typing. The title of her post read, "The Day the System Slapped Me." In the post, she wrote about everything, the racism, the double standards, the humiliation. She didn't hold back. Every word bled truth. By the time she hit publish, her hands were shaking. Within hours, it exploded. Thousands of comments, hundreds of thousands of shares. People across the country, and especially black women, Alex said, "I've been there. That happened to me too." It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a movement. Beat. "If you're watching this right now," she said in a later live stream, "don't ever let them convince you your pain is just a misunderstanding. Silence is what keeps injustice alive, but the attention came with new dangers." Her former law firm distanced itself. The police union called her a liar seeking fame. Even some of her friends stopped returning her calls. Then, an envelope showed up at her door. No return address. Inside, one line written in red ink. "You think you can destroy us? Watch your back." Danielle froze. Her mother begged her to stop speaking out. "Baby, please, I can't lose you," her mom whispered. Danielle hugged her tightly. "I can't stop, Mama. If I quit, they win." That night, she sat alone on her couch, staring at the TV. The news anchor was talking about her case. But the words hit like knives. Sources say the officer acted in self-defense. Eyewitnesses describe Danielle Brooks as agitated. Agitated. The word echoed in her mind. The label they always use when a black person refuses to stay quiet. She stood up, walked to the window, and whispered to herself, "They took my license, but they won't take my story." That's when she decided, if the system wouldn't give her justice, she'd become the system. What does Danielle mean by becoming the system? What's her next move after losing everything? Danielle didn't sleep that night. Her mind raced like a wildfire, every insult, every headline, every slap replaying on a loop. But somewhere between rage and resolve, a plan was born. She opened a folder she hadn't touched in years. Law school applications, judicial pathway. Back then, she'd laughed at the idea. Black women don't make it to the bench, her mentor had warned. And now she thought, why not prove them wrong? Her license might have been suspended, but her record was spotless. Her reputation? Broken, yes, but not dead. She still had her degrees, her brain, and something no one could take: the truth. She spent months rebuilding quietly, volunteering with community legal aid, speaking at colleges about racial bias in the justice system, recording videos that went viral, raw, unfiltered, fearless. "If justice has a color," she said in one clip, "then the system needs a new painter." Beat. "If you're watching this," she said in another live stream, "remember, power doesn't start in a courtroom. It starts with one person who refuses to shut up." Hit like if you agree and tell me in the comments, have you ever been silenced for speaking truth? One afternoon, Danielle got a call from Judge Eleanor Jackson, the same woman who had comforted her after the slap. "Baby, there's a seat opening on the county bench next year," Eleanor said. Danielle laughed bitterly. "You know they'd never let me near a courtroom again." "Then make them," Eleanor replied. "Apply anyway. Don't ask for their permission to exist." Those words hit deep. Danielle hung up, walked straight to her desk, and filled out the application. Weeks passed. Then months. No response. She started to move on, until one crisp fall morning her phone buzzed. Subject: Judicial Nomination Hearing. Confirmation required. She sat frozen. Her chest tightened. This was it, but not everyone was celebrating. The media dug up her past again. They played the courtroom video on repeat. Talk show hosts debated her temperament. One headline read, "From defendant to judge? The audacity of Danielle Brooks." The threats returned. The doubts resurfaced. But so did her fire. She whispered to herself, "They called me emotional. They called me angry. Now they'll call me Your Honor." What happens when Danielle faces the same system that once tried to destroy her? But this time, from the other side of the bench. The morning of the judicial hearing felt like déjà vu. Same courthouse, same marble steps, same cold wind cutting across her face. But this time, Danielle Brooks wasn't in handcuffs. She wore a tailored navy suit and a calm, deliberate smile, the kind you practice in the mirror when you know the world is watching. The crowd outside buzzed. Reporters shouted questions. "Danielle, do you regret the confrontation with the officer? Do you think America's ready for a judge with your history?" She paused at the steps, looked directly at the cameras, and said, "If America isn't ready for truth and accountability, then I guess I'm right on time." Beat. "If you're watching this," she'd say later in her Storytime interview, "remember, they only fear you when they see power in your eyes. Comment if you've ever walked into a room knowing it wasn't built for you." Inside, the committee sat behind a long oak table. 12 men, 1 woman. Most of them older, white, skeptical. "Miss Brooks," began Senator Calloway, his tone sharp, "you were once arrested for disorderly conduct in this very building. Why should we trust you with the gavel?" Danielle met his eyes. "Because I know what it feels like to stand on both sides of this system. And that makes me dangerous to bias, not to justice." A low murmur filled the room. She continued, voice steady, unapologetic. "You want to know what I regret? Not the confrontation. I regret believing silence would make me safer. It never does. Not when you're black, not when you're a woman, and certainly not when you're both." Judge Eleanor Jackson sat in the audience, tears glistening in her eyes. Then came the final question. One of the senators leaned forward, smug. "Tell me, Miss Brooks, what would you do if that same officer stood before your bench tomorrow?" The room held its breath. Danielle smiled faintly. I'd let the law speak first. Then I'd let my memory remind me why fairness must have no color. Silence. Then unexpectedly an applause. Not from the senators, but from the crowd watching behind them. Black mothers, law students, journalists. Her story had spread beyond walls and whispers. Now it had power. That evening, as she walked out of the courthouse, the sun hit her face. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was fighting to survive. She was fighting to lead, but her battle wasn't over. Because behind closed doors, one senator whispered, "Over my dead body, she'll sit on that bench. And the vote? Still days away. Will the system finally allow Danielle to rise or crush her one last time?" 3 days later, gray skies hung over the city like a warning. Danielle sat in her mother's kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. Every tick of the clock sounded louder than the last. The vote was happening right now, behind closed doors. 12 people deciding her fate. Again, her mother touched her shoulder gently. "You've already won, baby," she said softly. "No, Mama," Danielle whispered. "Winning means they can't erase me." Beat. If you're watching this, Danielle's voice would later echo in her documentary. Remember, power doesn't come from being liked. It comes from being undeniable. Hit like if you've ever fought for something everyone said you'd lose. At noon, her phone buzzed. A text from Judge Eleanor Jackson. "Turn on the news." Danielle's heart slammed in her chest. She fumbled for the remote. The anchor's voice filled the room. Breaking news. After a heated debate, the State Judicial Committee has reached its decision on attorney Danielle Brooks. A pause. Every second felt like a century. By a narrow margin of 7-6, the board has confirmed Danielle Brooks as the newest judge of Fulton County. The cup slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Her mother screamed, clutching her like she was 5 years old again. Outside, neighbors cheered. Car horns blared. Social media exploded. But Judge Brooks was trending worldwide. That evening, Danielle stood in front of the courthouse steps, the same place she was once dragged in handcuffs. Now cameras flashed for a different reason. "Judge Brooks," a reporter asked, "how does it feel to return here? As the first black woman to preside over this court?" She smiled, steady and proud. "It feels like justice found its way home." But even as the crowd clapped, she caught a glimpse of someone in the back. Officer Doyle, the same man who'd slapped her. He was standing still, expression unreadable. Their eyes met for one long, silent moment. No rage, no revenge. Just truth. Danielle turned away. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "They'll judge you twice, baby. For your skin and for your strength." And now, she thought, let them. Because her strength had just rewritten history, yet deep down she knew her story wasn't ending here. The courtroom had given her power. But power always came with a price, and soon that price would come knocking. What happens when Danielle faces her first case as a judge, and the man standing before her is the same cop who once slapped her? The courtroom was silent. Not tense, still, like the air itself was holding its breath. Judge Danielle Brooks adjusted her robe, straightened the papers on her desk, and looked up. Her clerk announced the next case. Case number 5479, Officer Charles Doyle versus the state of Georgia. The name hit her like a chill. For a split second, her hand froze midair. Doyle, the man who'd slapped her across the face. The man whose actions had nearly destroyed her career. Now he stood before her, not in uniform, but in a defendant's suit. Charged with excessive force and civil rights violations, life had come full circle. "If you're watching this," she'd later say in a video clip that went viral, "what would you do if the person who broke you now stood begging for your judgment? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe." The room buzzed quietly. Doyle didn't look the same, older, defeated, eyes heavy with regret. But that didn't erase the memory of that slap, or the humiliation that followed. Danielle looked down at the file, then back at him. Her voice calm, clear. "Officer Doyle, I trust you understand the charges against you?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor. The sound of those words, "Your Honor," felt like lightning through her chest. A moment of poetic justice, but Danielle didn't smile. She had dreamed of this moment once: revenge, retribution, validation. But standing here, she realized something deeper. This wasn't about her pain anymore. It was about principle. "Do you have counsel?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Doyle said softly, then hesitated. "I wanted to say something, if that's allowed." The courtroom hushed. Her bailiff shifted nervously. Danielle nodded. "You may speak." Doyle swallowed hard. "I was wrong," he said, voice cracking. "I thought I was enforcing order. I was enforcing my own hate. I'm sorry for what I did to you." For a moment, the world disappeared. All she could hear was her own heartbeat. Danielle took a slow breath, then said something no one expected. "Mr. Doyle, your apology doesn't erase the past, but accountability is where justice begins. This courtroom will decide your fate, not me alone." Her tone softened just slightly. "And I hope for your sake that you've learned the difference between power and abuse." She banged the gavel once. Court in session. As the trial began, reporters whispered outside the doors. The same cop who slapped her, now standing before her. America couldn't stop watching, but for Danielle Brooks, this wasn't revenge. It was redemption. For every person who'd been silenced, dismissed, or bruised by the system she now commanded. And the real verdict? That would come next. What verdict will Judge Brooks deliver? Justice, mercy, or both? The trial stretched for days. Witness after witness took the stand. Body cam footage played on screens. Grainy, haunting, undeniable. Every slap, every shove, every insult Officer Doyle had ever delivered under the guise of duty was laid bare for the world to see. Danielle sat quietly through it all. No expression. No reaction. Just the calm, unshakable gaze of a woman who'd already survived the storm. The prosecutor's closing words cut through the room like a blade. "No one is above the law. Not a thief, not a lawyer, and not a man with a badge." Then it was over. The jury deliberated for hours. The courtroom lights dimmed into evening. The air grew thick with anticipation. Beat. "If you're still watching," Danielle's voice would later narrate in her story video, "this was the moment I realized justice isn't a feeling. It's a choice." Comment below. What does justice mean to you? The jury returned. 12 faces, 12 souls carrying the weight of a nation's conscience. The foreperson stood. "Your Honor, we the jury find the defendant, Officer Charles Doyle." A pause, even time seemed to stop. "Guilty on all counts." The room erupted. Some gasped. Others cried. Danielle closed her eyes, a single tear tracing down her cheek. Not of joy, of release. For years she had carried that pain, the slap, the silence, the shame. And now, in the same courtroom where she'd once been humiliated, justice had finally stood up. Doyle's attorney placed a hand on his shoulder. He looked up at her, eyes red, voice trembling. "Thank you," he whispered. It was strange. He wasn't thanking her for mercy. He was thanking her for fairness, for doing what he never did, separating power from prejudice. Danielle nodded once. Then she spoke the words that would make headlines across the country. "Justice isn't revenge, it's restoration. And today, this court restores what hate tried to destroy: accountability." She banged the gavel once, firm and final. Court adjourned. Outside cameras flashed like fireworks. Reporters shouted questions. "Judge Brooks, how does it feel to sentence the man who once assaulted you?" Danielle stopped on the courthouse steps. Her face calm, her voice steady. "It doesn't feel like victory," she said. "It feels like balance." The world listened. And for the first time in a long time, America didn't just see a black woman in power. It saw justice wearing her skin. What happens after the verdict, when Danielle faces the nation's spotlight and must decide what her legacy will be? The night after the verdict, the courthouse stood empty. The world outside was roaring. News crews, talk shows, politicians. Everyone wanted a piece of Judge Danielle Brooks. But inside her chambers, she sat alone. No cameras, no applause. Just the hum of silence and the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened window, tired, wise, unbroken. She whispered to herself, "You did it, Mama. You really did it." Then her phone buzzed, hundreds of messages, interview requests, speeches, invitations. But one text stopped her cold. It was from Officer Doyle. "I don't expect forgiveness, but thank you for being what I never was, fair." She stared at the message for a long time, then set the phone down and looked at her gavel. Justice, she realized, wasn't about punishment. It was about truth surviving the noise. And that truth, her truth, had finally found a voice. Beat. "If you're watching this," she'd later tell her audience in her now famous speech, "remember, justice isn't born in marble buildings. It's born in the hearts of people brave enough to say no more." If you feel that, hit like, share this story, and tell me in the comments, what does justice look like to you? A week later, Danielle returned to the same courtroom, not for a trial, but for something far more powerful. A ceremony. The state had officially named her chief judge of Fulton County. She stood behind the podium, facing a sea of faces. Young, old, black, white, all watching, waiting. Cameras clicked. Lights flashed, but her eyes found her mother in the front row. Tears rolled down the older woman's cheeks. Her voice trembled when she whispered, "They judged you twice, baby, for your skin, for your strength, and both times you passed." Danielle smiled, took a breath, and spoke into the microphone. "Years ago, I stood in this very room handcuffed and humiliated. I was told to know my place, so I did, and my place is right here, behind this bench, holding the same gavel that once silenced me, and using it to make sure no one else is ever silenced again." The audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the chamber, and in that moment, the story came full circle. The woman once slapped in court now commanded it. Not through anger, through grace. That night, as the courthouse emptied, Danielle lingered a moment longer. She ran her hand along the polished wood of her desk, whispering, "For every black woman told she's too loud, too bold, too much, keep speaking. Because one day they'll have to listen." The lights dimmed. The doors closed. And justice, real, human, imperfect, relentless, finally had a face. Judge Danielle Brooks. Racism isn't just about hate, it's about power. And when one voice dares to rise against it, even a slap can become a spark that lights a revolution. What would you have done in Danielle's place? Would you have forgiven or fought back? Tell me your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories of resilience, courage, and the fight against discrimination. Years passed, and yet people still whispered about that day. The day a black woman was slapped in court, and later returned to that same court wearing the robe of a judge. Judge Danielle Brooks had become more than a name. She was a symbol, a reminder that pain can be powerful if you know how to use it. But she never forgot where she came from. She still drove the same car, still lived in the same modest apartment downtown, and every Sunday she still took her mother to church. There were no entourages, no luxury, just purpose. "If you're watching this," Danielle said one afternoon in a live Q&A from her office, "don't wait for the world to hand you respect. Build it, brick by brick, fight by fight. Hit like if you've ever had to earn every inch of your dignity." Her courtroom became a refuge. People said it felt different when she presided. Defendants weren't just case numbers. She looked them in the eye. She listened. One day, a young black woman stood before her, trembling, accused of petty theft. Danielle saw something familiar in her, fear mixed with defiance. She asked softly, "Do you believe anyone ever gave me a chance when they saw me standing where you are?" The woman shook her head. Danielle smiled gently. "Then let me be the first." She offered probation, education assistance, and mentorship. That woman would later become one of her clerks. A second chance, the kind Danielle once prayed for herself. But even as she rose, the system didn't suddenly change overnight. Racism didn't vanish because a judge wore brown skin and truth in her voice. No, the fight just got louder. And Danielle made sure of that. She spoke at law schools, prisons, and community centers. Her words carried across the nation. The system isn't broken. It was built this way. So our job isn't to fix it. It's to rebuild it. Together. Crowds stood, clapped, cried. Young women lined up just to shake her hand. To them, she wasn't just a judge. She was proof. 10 years later, the state unveiled a bronze plaque outside the courthouse. It read, "This courtroom is dedicated to Judge Danielle Brooks, who turned injustice into legacy." Her mother stood by her side, tears glistening. The same marble floor where Danielle had once fallen in humiliation now reflected her image in honor. Danielle touched the plaque and whispered, "Mama, they finally spelled our name right. In history." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the courthouse, she sat in her office alone. On her desk lay two things: the gavel she'd been given at her swearing-in and a small framed photo of herself from that terrible day. The slap. She looked at it, not with pain, but with peace, because that was the moment that changed everything. She turned off the lights, stepped out into the hallway, and smiled to herself. "They wanted me silent," she whispered. "Instead, they gave me a microphone." The door closed behind her. And the echo that followed wasn't of footsteps. It was of a legacy walking into eternity. Justice doesn't start in courtrooms. It starts in courage, in the quiet decision to rise when the world wants you down. Danielle Brooks didn't just survive racism. She transformed it into reform, one verdict at a time. What lesson did you take from Danielle's journey? Would you have forgiven, or would you have fought harder? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories of courage, change, and the fight for equality.